One of the most feared parts of a castle was a dungeon, in which a prisoner would be held inside of. They were not very good places to be within, as if you were inside of one, chances are that you were in serious trouble. They were dark and squalid prisons, and often torture was applied inside of them. However, they did have other uses too, and they weren't always associated with death and suffering. Today we look at dungeons, and remember to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. The word dungeon comes from the French word donjon, which derived from the Latin term for lordship. They refer to what is most known as a castle's keep in England, and it's most likely that dungeon as a term was used as often prison cells in castles were found within the largest tower, usually the keep. Dungeons were used to hold prisoners in a cell for a short term, when they were awaiting punishment, a trial, or even execution. People were even held in these for ransom, and for those of noble birth, it was not a place for them. Usually high-ranking prisoners such as royalty were housed in luxurious accommodation inside of the castle instead of dungeons. For example, Elizabeth I, when she was princess, was imprisoned inside relative comfortable lodgings at the Tower of London. From the 13th century onwards, dungeons became a rather popular element of castles, and many later castles had dungeons built inside of them, or rooms converted. Inside of a castle's keep was the place for the lords and ladies of society, and not for prisoners, so dungeons were created in the basements and cellars, and in the least desirable places. Most cells were found on the lower floors or below ground, and often they were built into the walls and rooms of large gatehouses. This meant that guards who were keeping an eye on the castle could take prisoners easily, and hold them inside the confines of a gatehouse under close watch. In times of warfare, taking prisoners was a key thing to do, as they could be held for ransom, and later be used as bargaining chips. Edward I, during his campaign against the Welsh rebels, took many prisoners inside his newly built castles to use as ransom. Dungeons are most commonly associated today with torture, and although torture was used during the medieval and Tudor period, dungeons were also used for other means too. Torture chambers were found inside of dungeons, as the screams from prisoners could be hidden. For example, using the rack and other devices, such as the manacles, would generate colossal amounts of pain, and if the lord was entertaining guests, it would not be good for them to hear everything and the screaming. Many of the worst tortures came in the form of the psychological torture that being locked in a dungeon for a long time could have. The Oubliette was a hole in the ground where prisoners were left to rot and die, and many dungeons like these became notorious for their reputations of suffering. In fact, at Warwick Castle, their dungeon's reputation even spread to France during the 100 Years' War, with the French soldiers worried about being captured and taken there. They often had no toilets too, so a prisoner would be forced to relieve themselves in the same room which they were staying, which could often cause disease and encourage rats to cause problems too. Dungeons were very simple in their appearance. They were often very plain and simple, with no or very tiny windows that would let any light in, aimed to make a prisoner feel very uncomfortable. Often it was very damp inside of them, which could cause other problems as well. Inside the Tower of London and the Salt Tower, it was said to be freezing cold and damp due to the River Thames and the moat licking the edges of the walls, causing a significant degree of damp. During the Jacobite Rebellion, inside of Carlisle Castle, 90 rebels were imprisoned in the dungeon, and to stay alive they were forced to lick the damp walls to get some water and hydration, as they were given none. One notorious dungeon that did exist within the Tower of London was known as Little Ease. This was a tiny cell built into a wall inside of the White Tower, in which a prisoner would be forced to either stand or crouch for 24 hours a day, as the constraints of the cell prevented any real movement. This would be enough to drive a prisoner mad, and it was rumoured that Guy Fawkes, following his ordeal on the rack, was thrown into Little Ease before his execution, and he would have suffered greatly. Today this specific dungeon has been lost to time, and its location is not fully known inside of the tower. Today dungeons capture the imagination of anyone who goes to visit a castle, as you can really understand what went on inside of the horrific place, and how terrible it would have been to be imprisoned there. It must have been very scary for prisoners throughout the centuries, not knowing if your execution came soon or if you would ever be released. One thing to consider is that inside medieval castles The general public were not usually kept inside dungeons here, instead being held in the cells in town halls or other places. Dungeons in medieval castles were reserved for high-profile prisoners, and for those who could be of some worth if a ransom was paid. Once again, thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.